Over 2 million Americans have now been vaccinated against the coronavirus. It is far fewer than the 20 million vaccinations which were promised by the Trump administration by year's end, and with less than a week to go, meeting that goal seems unlikely. This says more than 118,000 Americans are hospitalized with coronavirus. Holiday travel threatens to fuel another surge, and the total number of cases in the U.S. has topped 19 million in recent days. More than 334,000 have died. And the outbreak in California is getting worse. The U.S. military is now deploying doctors and nurses to help. Carter Evans reports.
Even with all the warnings, more passengers jammed airports on Sunday than any day since the pandemic began, even after the post-Thanksgiving surge that is overwhelming California hospitals.
I think we're now in a viral tsunami.
Dr. Robert Kim Farley is a UCLA epidemiologist who fears what's next. What happens when you get a surge on top of a surge?
Yes, that's exactly really what we're experiencing. In that case, your hospitals become overloaded.
So when you call other hospitals to try and send a patient there, what answer are you getting?
There's no room at the inn.
And when it comes to vaccinations, they're happening much slower than expected. U.S. health officials promised to deliver 20 million doses by the end of the month, but just over half have been distributed, and only a fraction have actually received the vaccine. In New York, reports that some may have used connections to get their shots early brought threats of up to $1 million fine.
We want to send a clear signal to the providers that if you violate the law on these vaccinations, you will be prosecuted.
In Florida, hundreds of seniors camped out overnight to receive the Moderna vaccine. And today in South Carolina, after workers and patients at a retirement home got vaccinated.
It's just answered a prayer. It's been a long several months for us.
But the virus continues to take a horrible toll. COVID has now already killed 1 out of every 1,000 Americans. And then there are the daily struggles. Pro golfer Greg Norman described the COVID experience as headaches that feel like a chisel going through your head. And this warning tonight from a frontline doctor in California.
We will take care of you. We'll find places. We'll put you in hallways. We'll put you in conference rooms. But ask yourself, is a bed in a conference room as good as the bed in a regular patient room? I don't think so.
And tonight there's growing concern about the new strain of virus in the UK that appears to be even more contagious. Now the CDC is requiring all passengers from Great Britain to present a negative test result before they even board a plane bound for the U.S. Omar?
Carter Evans, thank you very much. Infectious disease specialist Dr. Uzma Syed joins me now. Doctor, what's your take on how the vaccine is being distributed on the ground level?
Thank you so much for having me. This is a very complicated process, and essentially it's a new process for all of us, but there are many, many moving parts, and certainly we are not reaching the target that we had initially hoped of the 20 million people vaccinated by the end of the month. And there really is this urgency to be vaccinated that the general population, especially healthcare workers, are really feeling, being that most of us are, on the front lines, and with the growing number of cases and hospitalizations and unfortunately deaths, and being in the scale of the pandemic that we're in right now, there is certainly that urgency. But, people also have to remember that this will take some time to really vaccinate, majority of the population of the U.S. To eventually receive and reach that herd immunity.
A growing number of Americans are showing a willingness to take the vaccine. There are still some concerns about side effects. A new British study shows a small number of COVID patients who had no history of mental illness developing a psychosis. What are you seeing or what are you hearing about this since you're on the front lines?
So, from COVID-19, we already know that there are so many implications of this virus apart from just the respiratory illness itself. We know the virus can affect, your cardiac function, your neurologic function. We see many patients that have significant neurologic symptoms, a lot more common in the elderly as well. And it can be from something as mild as a headache to something more severe, such as these, rare reports of the psychosis that have been reported. And it's really, we're still learning so much about this virus. virus. And it's essentially, the thought is that the immune system is still hyperactive for a significant amount of time, and we see different amounts of effects on the body in different ways. And every day we learn something new, and people, very often do complain of cognitive decline in them and their loved ones that have been affected by this virus. So really, the effects of this virus are really profound.
We heard about Pfizer and Moderna. Now vaccine maker NOVAVAX just announced its vaccine has entered the final stages of testing here in the U.S. How does the vaccine compare to the other two, to Pfizer's and Moderna's? And how important is it, medically speaking, that you have several different versions of the vaccine?
So I think this is great news. We have been anxiously awaiting for vaccines to different vaccine candidates to go through clinical trials to really reach that safety and efficacy profile in order to receive approval or emergency use authorization. So, we have these two mRNA vaccine candidates, and now Novavax is announcing the entering of the phase 3 clinical trials. So to, really reach the population of the United States and the world, the more vaccine candidates that we have that in fact do pass through all these rigorous safety and efficacy profiles, the better it is. So, we're really looking at as many vaccine candidates as we can have that are safe and effective is really what we need to really fight this global scale of this pandemic that we're in right now.
As you're aware, last month, the FDA approved monoclonal antibodies to treat coronavirus patients who have mild and moderate symptoms. Yet it's still largely unused in hospitals here in the U.S. Do you know why?
So this is a great question. Again, monoclonal antibodies, are really promising to really target and prevention of progression of this disease. The issue that lies within that is that, it really is very complex in administering this. This is not a medication that comes in oral formulation. It comes in IV form. Patients have to be screened. They have to meet certain criteria to really receive the medication. They have to be administered, in a very close monitored environment where the patients have to be monitored during the infusion. They have to be monitored afterwards. So it's not something that's very simple. So although it had received emergency use authorization from the FDA for patients who are not hospitalized, the trick that comes in there is how to really set up that process so that the patients who really meet the criteria and need these therapies can in fact get them.
It sounds like it's not take 2 of these and I'll come and see you in the morning. It sounds like it's very labor intensive.
Absolutely.
And former commissioner of the FDA, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, told Face the Nation Sunday the U.S. is facing a, quote, grim month ahead. Cases are exploding on the coast. What's behind the latest increase? We just had, the Christmas holiday now. And can hospitals handle all the patients?
It's really alarming what's happening in the nation, the rise in cases and hospitalizations and unfortunately deaths that follow behind in this time of year are not surprising because as we've moved indoors, we are seeing more virus being transmitted. There are many variables for this. A lot of this has to do with pandemic fatigue. It's the time of the year where people like to gather with family. There's abundance of travel. Where we saw the surge after Thanksgiving, we're continuing with that. We are surging right now, even before, Christmas happened. And then now, we're heading into New Year's. So the next, several weeks and months of this, winter season are going to be really, really challenging. And you hear about it throughout the nation, how the hospitals are at capacity and running out of ICU beds and running out of ventilators. This is not a situation that we want. We want to do everything that we can to protect people and to save more lives.
We know that New Year's is coming up and there's a lot of tradition that goes with that, but people are obviously, some organizations are taking heed. The Rose Bowl parade not happening. You're not going to see huge crowds in downtown New York, hopefully, that you would see for, New Year's Eve. What's your advice to Americans who are experiencing pandemic fatigue and want to do something for the new year? You don't want to see them. You don't want to see them in a hospital. What would you tell them?
Absolutely. We really care about the health and safety of all of our community members, our patients, our loved ones, our neighbors. We just know that this is really difficult on everyone. All of us in healthcare are feeling the same way. We all have pandemic fatigue as well. And we certainly want to be with our loved ones as well. But there is so much hope on the horizon with vaccines and, that we have great things to be hopeful about in the near future. If we just make it through this next stretch, it's really important that people remember that the virus is very prevalent in the community, and you may feel fine one day, but as soon as you get together with people outside of your household, especially gathering in indoors where the virus transmits very, very quickly and very easily, you're taking a lot of risk, and we certainly don't want to see you sick, and we certainly don't want to see you hospitalized. And we have to remember that we still do not have any medication that's 100% curative for this virus.
Dr. Uzma Syed, thank you for doing what you do and for taking time to talk to us. Thank you.
My pleasure.